Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the book of Isaiah. Today we'll be reading chapters 34 to 39, so let's get right into it. And we start off in chapter 34 with God warning that he is going to judge the nations. He says in verses 1 through 4 that he's going to destroy all the nations and unravel his work of creation. He'll start with Edom, the longtime adversary of God's people. He says it will become a wasteland and her strongholds overgrown and inhabited only by wild animals. And in case you are wondering, Edom today is a completely abandoned place where no one lived. So God was true to his word, and that's evident even to this day. And then that brings us to chapter 35. And then in this chapter, he prophesies of the glory of Zion. And in the first couple of verses, we see that a desert will spring into bloom. And if you don't know much about deserts, that's impossible with God. Not a lot grows in deserts. And that's actually the desert that God's people will travel through when they return from exile to their homeland, as we see in verse 10 of that chapter. And Isaiah encourages the weak and faint-hearted by telling them God is acting to save them. Now, personal handicaps or body and spirit, they're all going to be healed, and the hazards of nature are going to be reversed. And God is going to make all things new. He's going to make a new creation. So we have a promise here in chapter 35 and something to look forward to for God's people. And then we get to chapter 36, which kind of opens up a new theme. And that's what we're going to focus on more in this video today. We see here a king named Sennacherib. I guess it's Sennacherib, that's what we're going to call him. And Sennacherib is the king of Assyria, and he's going to try and conquer Israel during the reign of King Hezekiah. And this is quite a story, so let's take a look at it. And it starts in chapter 36. So right here at the beginning, Sennacherib opens up by boasting against the Lord. So he's bragging, he's calling out God, essentially, and says that he can't save his people against King Sennacherib and his mighty armies. And he's just, his arrogance and his pride is on full display. And he has the military advantage over God's people, and he knows it, and God's people also know it as well. And they knew that they were in a pretty hopeless situation. So Sennacherib is just out there basically taunting God's people, and more specifically, he's taunting God, and that is going to be his big mistake. So then in chapter 37, Isaiah assures that God is going to deliver his people. After Sennacherib had threatened God's people and blasphemed the Lord, Hezekiah knew that he had nowhere else to turn. So he goes to the Lord and prays for deliverance. Look at what he says there in verse 20. Now therefore, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord, even thou only. So look at how he pleads with God. He asks for his help, and the reason why God should help them is that so all the kingdoms of the earth would know that he was the Lord. And then we see God's response there starting in verse 21. Make sure that you read these, because this is the Lord talking now to King Hezekiah. But to sum it up, he's telling him that he's God. He's the creator of the universe, and he has the power over everything, including this pagan king and his mighty army. He promises that he's going to defeat his armies, and then look what happens in verse 36. Then the angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So God doesn't make his people do anything here. He goes out and does it himself. He sends his angel. The angel of the Lord went forth and fought for them, killing 185,000 men. That's a lot. And so this is an incredible story. And oh, how the mighty Sennacherib has fallen. After the humiliating defeat, he returns home with his tail tucked between his legs, and then he's murdered by his own son. So life can sure come at you fast, and it definitely happened for this king here. He taunted God, and he challenged God, and he lost everything. Then that brings us to chapter 38. Sennacherib is kind of out of the way, and we're moving on more to focus on Hezekiah, the king of God's people, that was supposed to be the good king. And he's actually dying, but he prays to the Lord saying, "Remember, Lord, I've been faithful to you all of these years." And God remembers and gives him 15 more years of life. After being miraculously healed, Hezekiah really doesn't finish well, though, with those extra 15 years that he's been given. In fact, it would probably have been better if he had just died. And we'll see why right here in in chapters 38 and 39. So what happens is he has these kings of Babylon come to visit him, and he showed off all of his treasures, everything that he has. And Isaiah comes to him and says, Hezekiah, what did you show these men? And he says, I showed them everything. And Hezekiah really what he did is he showed them all the riches of God's temple. He showed them all the riches of his kingdom, and he basically was boasting and bragging about all that he had. And so Isaiah told him that everything that he showed those guys, he was going to lose because of this. But then look at the last verse there in chapter 39. It really kind of shows who Hezekiah turned into in his old age. Then said Hezekiah to Isaiah, good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. He said, moreover, for there shall be peace and truth in my days. So Hezekiah wasn't worried about the destruction of his kingdom or of God's people. He was just thankful that it wouldn't be happening during his lifetime. It was all about him. Hezekiah had just heard that God was going to destroy his people. They were going to be judged. And the only thing that he's worried about is his own lifetime and his own time. That is not what the heart of Christ should look like. That is not what the heart of one of God's people should look like. And we can't be like this, okay? We as Christians and as God's people should always be looking out for the generations that come up after us, to build them up and to help to make sure that they're taken care of and have the best chance possible to succeed. We want to make sure that we're spreading God's love to anyone who would listen, and especially hoping to leave this world a better place than we found it, and to leave God's church a stronger place than we found it, to help it as best as we humanly can. But Hezekiah was only worried about himself. And let's take a lesson from this and make sure that we finish well. You see, Hezekiah was given 15 extra years because he was a faithful servant to God. And essentially, in those extra 15 years, he stopped being a faithful servant to God. And we've got to make sure that no matter what we go through, no matter how difficult life can get, that we are always faithful, and that when people tell the story of our lives, they can say that we finished well. We can't say that about Hezekiah, but we can try and make sure that people say that about us one day. So that's the lesson for today, and I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow in the book of Matthew.